Hello, everyone. Stucky here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast show. Okay, this looks a bit different. Hi. Hello, Gabby. You look hairy today.
Yeah, been growing the beard out. We've been separated for like 38 seconds, so boom.
You know, honestly, if this was the scenario where, in Kentucky, which is where I live, for anyone who isn't aware, you have to sign a form when you get married that essentially states that you are not related to one another. That is a thing. You have to confirm this. And in normal circumstances, for those of you who obviously have seen my wife and you know that we look nothing alike, this, on the other hand, this would raise some eyebrows, to say the least.
Oh God, that poor clerk in Kentucky. Like, I'm going to need to see some family trees and make sure that they're not just one of those intertwined ones that you find in mystical lands.
It's just the Habsburgs, or it's we're
gonna have epic chins.
Zoroastrians. Oh, yes. Hello, Millie. Yeah.
Oh,
for those of you who had been asking in previous episodes in order to be able to see like our dogs and whatnot, and you couldn't really see anything by the way the angle is at, I'm literally set up in my office that we've been rebuilding. That's my German Shepherd, Millie. She is wandering around here looking for attention in the first place, and you're probably going to see the cat come into frame at some point. A lot of people were demanding more of Moonbeam in the previous episode.
It's like our turkey trip all manifests online. I still
Everyone just wants the cats.
I loved when I asked our tour guide, I was like, so of American groups that you have guided, are we the most animal people? He goes, yes. So much, you guys are miles above anyone I've ever dealt with. When I had to tell Arnold that he's not allowed to pet the 180-pound Alsatian Shepherd that was like walking through, and I was like, no, we don't pet the livestock guardian dogs. Those are that no, we absolutely do not, especially when they look extremely mangy as well while going through the streets. It's not something you necessarily want to do, which that actually then brings us to, I suppose we spent the whole previous part of this trying to figure out what the hell we were going to be doing in terms of topics, and we're like, okay, we could do several things. We could talk about tanks. We could talk about animals. And we could talk about the law, one of the laws that is being used to indict Maduro, the president of Venezuela, who just got taken and brought to the United States and is on trial or at least in court now for his first hearing in New York. That just happened. Yes. And they are going to be charging him, according to Representative Thomas Massey, with a violation of the 1934 U.S. National Firearms Act, which is the act that regulated the access to explosives, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and machine guns.
Okay. See, a part of me, like, this is one of the things that when you just look at that from the very get-go and you think like, okay, hold on. This is the president of another country. How the hell is something like that even possible to be charged with? And it's like, I don't know exactly what is specifically going to be going on with this. I haven't looked into nearly as much detail on specifically how the court case is supposed to be going with this, because I got to say, I woke up, not yesterday, 2 days ago. I woke up on January 3rd at 10 in the morning after I had been up late drinking. And then I discovered that I have 40 messages on my phone at 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, oh my God, what the hell did I miss? What happened? And I felt like when I was like, what was it? 2011, I think it was, when I was taking a shower in the morning, getting ready for school, because I was in high school at the time. And my father bursts into my bathroom as I am in the shower and he just goes, we got him. I'm like, what are you talking about? It was Osama bin Laden.
Huh. Cause I mean, my family might've been later, but I remember it happening at night but I don't know. I remember getting a text message while I was working at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and
was it at night or was it when I got home from school? I remember it was like in that duration.
I remember being at work, so that makes me think it was in the afternoon sometime. But like, yeah, I remember those it's one of those moments you'll never forget where you were. But like, then you talk to people like, hey, where were you on 9/11? And you're like, I was somewhere doing something. But yes, this is, well, and another one was like the Ukraine war. Like I remember waking up
that day and being like, holy shit, like this is happening. And it became like a spectator sport. And it was the first war that you like tracked via like Reddit posts of like, oh, the Russian army just drove through my town. You're like, oh crap.
And it's all being documented, and Russian soldiers were literally posting selfies of themselves in the different locations, which is one of the things that led to them getting striked.
Yes, the geotag.
Holy
the geotag
crap.
worked great. But yeah, it's one of those remarkable things of, you know, no one knew about it. Oh, there's a conversation about how little people knew about that, but that's not what we're necessarily covering. I just found it fascinating that somehow we are charging the semi-leader of a country with possession of a machine gun and how we got there.
Only way I can think of it here, and again, I'm saying this, I have not looked into this specific part here. The only reason I think that something like that would even be possible in the first place is because, first off, when people say like, oh, he's a sovereign, like he's the leader of a country, of a sovereign country, and I look at that and go, technically speaking, he is the guy who is in charge, but he is not the legitimate leader, because he is in fact a dictator who stole the previous election and arguably the previous 2 elections before that. Because specifically, for anyone who is curious about this, I strongly recommend that they actually go and look into the history of Venezuela for what ended up taking place, because the opposition was winning in the previous election they had, and the government basically shut down the election. Everything went dark for 24 hours, and then they came out later and said, oh yeah, by the way, Maduro won. And then they just moved on from there, because go figure, every high-ranking official, military man, etc., was straight in the government's pocket, funded by its oil. Like
it's funny when you listen to the Revolutions podcast long enough, you soon realize that most of our institutions are just, because we all kind of agree on it. It's like if the right like 12 people are like, nah, I don't want to, then shit just doesn't progress. And
there are more balances though that specifically stop something like that. I mean, yes, something could stop progressing, but it doesn't mean it's going to turn into something else. It just more so it's like hitting a roadblock. Whereas I distinctly remember this when there was the whole debate within the United States and people were talking about, oh yes, well, if we're not going to get our way with the Supreme Court, we could just add on another judge. And then what happens with the next election cycle? And then another judge gets added, and then another, and another. And there was that debate of like, that was something that I think it was under Biden that he was threatening to specifically add more judges. And adding 1 or 2 judges, while bad, pales in comparison to what Maduro had done, which was double the size of his Supreme Court. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like, oh yeah, we added 1 here, then 1 there, etc. No, he straight up over doubled the size of the Venezuelan Supreme Court and packed it all with his personal appointees, which is how they were able to pretty much rubber stamp anything that he said.
Yeah, you used to see, well, if you're a history nerd, you used to see this with like Roman emperors. Whenever the Senate was like not agreeing with him, they'd be like, hey, let's just add like 600 senators. Like, now you guys are invalid.
Go figure.
Julius Caesar's like, oh, I'm going to fill this not only with like my buddies, but like my veterans that used to kill for me. They're going to be the guy sitting next to you, just so you know. Like, this is fine.
Oh my God. I will actually ask that on the note, because I think that is a good jump from this. We can mix between different stuff for maybe animals, maybe the stuff for Venezuela. I do want to try to keep a semblance of an idea for how the show is going to go overall in the first place, because yes, this episode is going to be going up on the official, like the History of Everything podcast official YouTube page, which I know there's a point of confusion about this in the first place, because the History of Everything podcast was started specifically to do stuff for the podcast, but then it went from more just pure history to historical geopolitics. And that's how it is that we got to where it is that we are today, where I have 3 different YouTube channels. And the Stakuyi page was originally started as it was supposed to just be history. Then the History of Everything was supposed to just be history. Now we have a 3rd one. And this 3rd one is history.
I mean, as much as people want to be like, oh, history, leave the politics out of history. You're like, do you understand what history is? It's the contextualization of a story within your perspective of how things go.
I think there's a difference then of contextualization of history versus moralization of history. And that is
Yes.
usually where there's a problem of there is nothing inherently wrong with interpreting an aspect of history using your modern understanding and sensibilities. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. The problem is if you are incapable of separating yourself to understand why something happened and not just use your own superior sense of morality to go, well, of course, yeah, no, this is absolutely awful in here. And it's like, yeah, no, we know it's awful, but it's like if it can get very dangerous very fast depending upon the type of people that are utilizing this.
Yep. Right, because the moral perspective shifts, and if you don't put the context of the morals at the time onto in the environmental context, examples of this are like how animals were treated in the past, and the people are like, oh my god, how could they do that? And you're like children die, like they didn't give names to children until they were like 5 because they were like, they might survive, it doesn't matter. So like a dog was not, it was man's best friend, but there's really no reason that you valued it more than like a human life because, well, you didn't value any of the life.
No. Like, again, you're not going to. And I'm glad you actually brought up the whole point of even that and talking about animals. Did you see the previous episode we did?
No, I think I saw snippets of it.
So we brought up there was a number of things that ended up happening with we did like Patreon questions that people had asked and to talk about the stories. And there was a story of a woman who, in order to get famous, shoved rabbit parts up her hoo-ha and then pretended to birth them.
Excellent. Let's go.
And like straight up, what it is they would do is like, oh, we're going to do this hoax. And they would pay children to capture animals, which they would then kill, cut them up, and then shove them up there.
Yep.
And it's like, that's, if you talk about a person in history doing this and you're like, wow, that's some like crazy, weird behavior. These people, that's stupid. You hear about someone doing that now and that's, oh, this is serial killer.
Yes.
Like that's a serial killer that does that. It's a completely different perspective of like your moral framework of how you work with things.
Right. Well, and part of it that you're like, oh, people back in the day, they were weird or they're crazy, whatever. But you're like, no, I'm sure at the time when people figured out that was a hoax, they were like, this is disturbing. Like we're used to death and weird shit, but like, this is really disturbing.
Oh God, no, it absolutely is. Oh, all right. Now at this point, then, what are we diving into? I know it's my show in the first place, but I'm more so curious as to specifically what it is you may be interested. Also, I realized in the first place, we've been doing this and talking about this whole time. I haven't even clarified who the hell this is in the first place.
Minor details.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Steven, aka Stakuyi of the History of Everything podcast. And this is Jeff.
Hello.
The friendly giant.
Yes.
He is, in fact, 6'9", which every conversation that refers to him has to mention in the first place. And he went on our Turkey trip with us, where there were many shenanigans that were had. And he does a lot of crazy things, like being a really good shooter.
I try.
You need to talk about a bit yourself here, because at this point, I'm just going to butcher and make it sound weird.
I know. So I'm a competition pistol shooter. I shoot USPSA. I'm a master class USPSA shooter. I own a Muay Thai gym and I won a national title belt in Muay Thai. So I'm very experienced with violence. I like to travel around the world. I've been to most of the continents, and I intend to go to more of them with Steve and Gabby. Like they run awesome tours that I am going on a lot of them this year. I'm very excited. I'm also going to get a hit him with an axe. That's its own whole thing. So I'm a giant nerd that I have extreme ADHD and I have autism. So I deep dive into things till I get about 80% of the information, and then I move on to the next one. And so whatever topic you want to talk about, I probably have studied it only because I was like, oh, that's interesting. 3 weeks later, nope, never reading about it again.
And that is the life. That's what actually brings us here into history. All right. So if we're going to be talking about this, because I really do want to see more stuff about the 1934 law and specifically how that plays in. All right. How much do you know about like the actual history of Venezuela. This is where I need to ask you in the first place, not just like the general history of Venezuela, but also the history of how Maduro came to power in the first place, Chavez, and all like the reason why Venezuela is today what it is today.
So I have a base understanding of it. I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in any of it, but like I listened to the Revolutions podcast, so that gives me that nice base understanding of how they almost had pan South America until the guy who freed everybody was like, "Hey, let's all unite," and they're like, "Nah, no, like you can go away." And then they were a fairly effective nation for a lot of time. And then they hit a couple roadblocks, and then Chavez showed up and was like, nationalize everything. Everything's getting nationalized. Oil companies go away. And their oil production went from like number 3 in the world down to below countries that don't have like a lot of oil.
Like 10% of what they do. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Whereas Venezuela technically is sitting on the largest proven reserves of oil. And then, but their infrastructure.
Which every conversation mentioning Venezuela, and if there's anything to do with the U.S., it immediately becomes a conversation of, oh, it's an oil war. That's what it is. And it's significantly more complex than any of that, as well as people don't understand the difference in oil. That's like someone saying that when that's like if someone was going to be talking about grass with livestock, there's a complete difference between prairie grass and then the grass that is actually good and useful for livestock.
Right. And your stupid Kentucky grass that everyone has to put in their yard all over the Midwest.
Listen, it's not the Kentucky has some good grass. I'm telling you this. It also has grass that kills horses, which is a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Which is ironic for it also being the horse racing state of the country.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember exactly what it is that this grass does. My wife could bring up more about it. There's a whole thing for equine programs that are mixed with the agricultural programs here, where there's a specific species of grass that will actually not poison livestock. It will, what is it? It's like weakens their bones essentially from the inside, making them significantly more fragile.
Okay.
It is a grass that if it gets into a area where you have livestock that are grazed there, essentially the whole field has to be destroyed.
Oh, wow.
That exists there. And so there's all these things set up to try to monitor and find where this grass is located so that it doesn't grow into other parts. It's
right.
I'm trying to remember in the first place what it is.
And while he's doing that, I'm going to relate it to oil because for those of you who don't know, there's 3 or 4 major types of oil that are exchanged on the oil market. There's like heavy crude, which is the tar sands in Alberta and what Venezuela produces. And ironically, that's what the American refineries were set up for. Then there's light sweet crude, I believe it's called. That's what America actually produces a lot of in our fracking fields. I believe that's what the Saudis also produce. We don't actually refine our own shit. We just kind of sell it somewhere else and then refine the Canadian stuff because refineries are super expensive to make. And we didn't take the time to, we made a prediction in the late 90s and then Chavez showed up and we were like, crap, we made the wrong choice. So whenever you're talking about like where oil, like, we're producing 20 million barrels of oil a day. You're like, and we're not using a single barrel of it because we're shipping it to another country to get refined. And then they might ship it back to us, but it's actually going to the global market of oil pricing.
Yep. It gets real messy real quick. We're going to go into all that. So just on that note, I wanted to bring up the whole thing. So an article from last year talking about this, America's fescue belt, which is named for an exotic grass called tall fescue, dominates the pasture land from Missouri to Arkansas in the west to the coast of the Carolinas in the east. Within that swath, a quarter of the nation's cows, more than 15 million in all, graze fields that stay green throughout the winter, while the rest of the region's grasses turn brown and go dormant. But the fescue these cows are eating is toxic. The animals lose hooves, parts of their tails, and the tips of their ears slough off. For most of the year, they spend any moderately warm day standing in ponds or creeks trying to reduce fevers. They breathe heavily, fail to put on weight, and produce less milk. Some fail to conceive, and some of the calves do not conceive, die. The disorder, fescue toxicosis, cost the livestock industry up to $2 billion a year in lost production. It is the most devastating livestock disorder east of the Mississippi. So yeah, it's a whole thing from a grass. And that's like, if you told me as a kid that it's like, oh yeah, hey, there's just a grass, like the cows eat grass, it's fine, like they'll be able to do this. And it's like, oh, it's not a poison grass. Sure, like hemlock or some shit, but yeah, that happens.
Yeah, and my dad's out in cattle country, and they talk about certain, not that level of it, but they're like, hey, we're glad the cows don't eat that because the ones that have die, and they learn from group knowledge, like, hey, don't eat that kills you. But
oh, they absolutely do. All right, so then whole thing with this, so you obviously you know the whole thing for the story of how, or at least the basic idea of how things were going down here for Venezuela in the first place. And for a lot of people that are looking all this up here right now, they're probably wondering, why the hell are we where we are? I have done multiple episodes on this on my historical geopolitics page, but it's one of those things that it feels like it's an evergreen topic that you will always come back to, because I distinctly remember with things related to Venezuela being in college. And when I was in college, that is where everything started to go really bad. But when I was in high school, that is when everything seemed really good. And this was during the, I'm not going to say the peak, but it was during the rapid rise to internet fame and prominence for Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
And over the course of the mid 2000s to the very early 2010s, Venezuela was being lauded as proof, essentially, that like all the stuff with socialism, that it was the future, that it works, that this is something that you could do. And really, when you look at what it is that I'm going to be talking about here, it's understandable why a number of people think that. Now, the moment you start to actually dive deeper into it, you realize where all the flaws are and where things really fell apart as they did. But on paper, it genuinely does look incredibly impressive from the beginning, because there was a time in the early 2000s where the poorest population of New York City was being supplied cooking oil by Venezuela for free as a charity. Like, Venezuela was doing charity for New Yorkers.
Right. A key context for this is that in 2007-ish was the peak of oil prices.
Yes.
Like a barrel of crude was like $140 a barrel, or it was a lot of money. And so when you're flush with cash, you can do all this fun stuff. You can be throwing money everywhere, which way, and a key to this, you don't have to be very efficient with how much you're making, because you're making oodles of money. There's no reason to invest in being more efficient. I've already got a crap ton of money. Let's go spend it. And so you start to see the cracks in the system in 2008, 2009, when, because of the global recession, the oil price crashed down to like $50 a barrel. And the Venezuelans, who had predicted, I mean, I remember seeing the predictions that they're like, oh, crude is at 140. It's going to go to 150 next year. Then it'll go to 160. The classic, we've reached peak oil, but they didn't predict that oil is going to go down to $50.
They did. They were warned, though. That's the thing. But it doesn't matter when you have the system. And just to give you an idea of what it is we're talking about here, and this is what's so crazy, is people hear those numbers like, wow, that's a big drop. And then they don't understand how bad, again, that is in terms of inflation, right? $140 in 2007 is the equivalent from inflation of $218 today.
Yep.
So the fact that today, at the time that we are recording this right now, oil prices are $58 a barrel, that is ludicrous. It is, oil prices are 25% what they were 20 years ago.
Yep.
That's actually insane. And yes, exactly. When you are pumping all this money into things, you're like, oh, well, this is going to last forever. And then it doesn't. Everything comes crashing down really hard.
Right. And they did like to kind of balance out a little bit. They did some great things with this money. They got 1.5 million adults to learn how to read. They were trying to help a lot of people. But when the bills need to get paid and the money stopped coming in, things start getting complicated. And
exactly.
Luckily for Hugo Chavez, he died. He died right when the chaos was starting to get bad. And so in comes Nicolas Maduro as his hand-picked successor.
Yep.
One other interesting fact, just to provide context for the recent event, the Cubans who see the Venezuelans as a kindred people because they are part of the socialist revolution, yada, yada. They basically are the security force. Like they're the intelligence force for the Venezuelans. They train them how to like keep track of dissidents and do all that stuff. So in this recent strike, according to the Cubans, 32 Cuban military personnel were killed in this raid. The Venezuelans say there's 40 people who died total. So I don't know if whose numbers are wrong, but if you're wondering like, wait, why are the Cubans dying in Venezuela for whatever reason, it's because they were providing the backbone for the security service.
I've talked about this actually multiple times in relation to Cuba, and I love that you brought that up because what is so fascinating is that Cuban industry is so bad. It is so backwards and incapable of competing at any kind of national level that the greatest force that Cuba has, its greatest economic asset, is unironically its people. And when I say that, I don't mean like, oh, its people are so kind and heartwarming and loving. And it's like, yeah, you have some people that are, sure. But I mean, physically, the only product that Cuba has to export besides cigars and some sugar, which the price of that is also catastrophically low, so it doesn't really help them very much, is literally its human capital. It sends out soldiers, it sends out intelligence forces, it sends out doctors, it sends out all these varying different people that will go to different countries where they will work on behalf of the Cuban state there as part of an outreach programs. And like, that's what they do.
You've actually, it's one of the funny things is if you go look at like the Bush wars in Africa, you'll be like, okay, I understand why France is on one side. Okay, I understand why Britain's on the other. And then you'll be like, Cuba's over here. There's like, right, it's like 86 Cubans involved. And you're like, wait, where did these Cubans come from?
Like in Mozambique's war against Portugal. Like there was the whole Cuban element to that.
Yep. Yeah. And most people don't talk about it is that the Cubans were actually one of the more active members of the communist bloc during the Cold War, because like Steve's saying, they didn't have anything else to do. They were blockaded and embargoed for most of their
literally
existence.
On the doorstep of the capitalist superpower. It's like they were the showman. They were the example. They were the thing that had to be kept propped up.
Yep. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they're like, again, kind of like Venezuela, they're like, ooh, that money, the bills, they need paid. Shit.
Oh my God, that's actually a fantastic point to bring up here in the first place. All right, I did a video on Cuba when talking about this, but this is a whole thing with historical economics that I find so funny. How much do you know about historical subsidies and how they've worked?
And an annoying amount, probably, compared to most people.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad that you say that here then. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, and you can feel free to interject with any parts of this, I already mentioned here before how one of the backbones of the Cuban economy for quite literally centuries had been sugar. And it still technically is, though sugar prices have absolutely cratered. What was happening with Cuba over the course of the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc.? Once the United States had developed high fructose corn syrup, which was a way to utilize more domestic production and reduce dependency on foreign sugar, of which Cuba was one of the largest producers in the world, that, along with many other factors, sent the Cuban system crashing. So what do you do when the majority of your economy is dependent upon just a few key products? Well, you either crash and burn, you find someone else to buy them, or specifically, maybe not even buy them, someone to bail you out by taking them off your hands pretty much. And that is what happened with Cuba.
So let's say the price of sugar was 50 cents a pound or something like that. Or let's just round it up. Let's say $1. Let's say it's $1 per pound or something. Just make it simple. It's not the accurate number, but let's say it is.
Yep.
The Soviet Union for decades was coming in and buying Cuban sugar at like $1.40 a pound.
Yep.
Just they were paying 20, 30, 40, 50% above market rates so that they could keep the Cuban state afloat. Meaning, as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, all of those subsidies that were keeping the Cuban state alive, that people were going like, oh, look, all this stuff is happening with Cuba. And like, even despite all the efforts of the US, it's still going strong and it's still doing all this stuff with free healthcare, etc., which not great quality in the first place, but it was something. It actually did do something, but it was the healthcare itself was kept on life support by virtue of this. And that crashed.
Yep. Because they're not incentivized to gain more technical knowledge or improve their system or make themselves more efficient, because they're like, hey, again, going back to it, hey, I get $1.40 a pound. Like I'm making 40% on you guys. Like, suck it. I don't even need to try.
And then most of the technological innovations, engines, updates, anything specifically came from the United States and Europe, which Western
were
Europe
embargoed.
Specifically embargoed it, so it didn't do anything.
Well, and you see this even in, nations all over the world. It's called the resource paradox. Is you think that a nation that has a crap ton of resources is going to be better because of it, and then none of them except for Norway have actually done like super well. You can have a conversation about the Gulf states because they essentially are like, hey, we're going to take $1 billion. You guys just live. Like, here's lots of money, live, whatever. But we're not going to have any other industry whatsoever. And yeah, it's one of those paradoxes that people fall into because they're like, oh, this is making a shit ton of money. This will be fine. And it rarely works out.
No,
that's
it's not.
And that's what the Venezuelan, like, taking it back to Venezuela, they were like, hey, you U.S. oil companies are getting cheap rates and you're not giving anything back to us. So, like, we're going to nationalize you, which is, it feels good. It's one of those things that feels right, but rarely works out well.
Yeah, that's not. I'm actually glad you brought up the whole point of the example of the Gulf states, because there's another economic problem that we're running into there now. And that is that certain countries are running into far more issues with their overall population as well as investment strategy. I'm going to do a video talking about what has been happening with Saudi Arabia, because for the longest time, if you think of an oil state and ridiculous wealth, you're thinking the Saudis. Like that's like the big thing. But among all the varying different major oil states, Saudi Arabia has the largest population by far, like huge in comparison to like the United Arab Emirates, et cetera. Like it's massive. Or Qatar. Qatar is another example. It's like, it's tiny. And yes, its oil reserves are like a quarter that of the Saudis. But if their population is like less than 10%, that means you're getting 2 to 3 times as much oil per person as you are in Saudi Arabia, as the overwhelming majority of the economy is dependent upon that one product. So if you have $10 million that you have to split among 1,000 people, that's a lot easier than $10 million split amongst 50,000 people. It's just resources.
Yep. And it's been fascinating within the energy sphere, watching the Saudis have to play the OPEC game of like, there's a long thing in the OPEC world of the Saudis basically they'll set a target with the knowledge that everyone else is going to cheat, but they have to follow it so that it like forces the system to do what they want it to do while knowing that others are profiting from it. But they're also, like you're talking about, they rely on slave labor and they're very unwilling to do anything themselves. And so like the whole Yemenis war that they've been in for like a decade.
That's another one I got to cover.
Was just a shit show of a bunch of guys who don't want to be there. They're like, wait, I can be back at like my my indoor ski resort in a mall, or I can be in the Yemeni desert trying to root out very passionate freedom fighters who then started launching missiles at boats. But that's its own whole other conversation.
And now they might even get beat out because the other side that just rose, the one that took over. You saw what happened with Yemen in like a month ago?
Oh no, I didn't. I was. So I got distracted.
Dude, it's been in a 3-way civil war for the entire duration, where you have the Yemeni government, you have a southern transition breakaway
state, Houthis, and then
and then you have the Houthis.
Oh,
this is a completely separate group. So I think it's like the STC, the Southern Transition Council, which is trying to essentially establish the state of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
They've essentially been power balanced between each other, like all three.
Oh, and
in the span of less than a week, even though this conflict has been going on for years, the STC all of a sudden blitzed the Yemeni government, completely taking over like 90% of its territory.
Like what happened in Syria, where the government just collapsed.
Exactly like in Syria. Yes. And now there's all the discussions that are going on of like, okay, is Saudi Arabia going to do anything against them? Or are they going to leave them? Or are they going to throw their support behind them and abandon the Yemeni government just to try and root out the Houthis? We don't really know yet. That's one of the things I'm going to have to make a video on looking into.
Yeah, that one will be fascinating. But try to transition our way back to Venezuela.
Even getting distracted when it's not even a history with all this.
Well,
all right.
Right. Well, and oil wars, what was the country right next to them that just found oil?
Guyana.
Guyana, that's what it was. So Guyana just found like crap tons of oil. Like
actual good quality oil.
Right. And they are French colony. They're a French colony, correct? Or a former French colony?
So Guyana it was a mix. There was a British, there was a French, and there was a Dutch.
Oh, yes.
It was like, I remember that from
EU4.
Suriname, I think. Is like, the whole thing is mixed right there.
Yeah. So they're on good terms with the Western world. And so they are predicted to have like a 25% GDP growth year over year for the next 5 years. Because
holy crap, yeah.
Right. They're just like, yeah, y'all come in. We're going to tax you, but like y'all come in, and we'll see how that balances out, because the Venezuelans, they were like, oh crap, we're going to invade you. And that was kind of when I remember, I think it was Perun or one of those guys like breaking down the Venezuelan military, and you're like, oh, this thing is like a shell just waiting to collapse on itself.
Yeah. 4.5 million militiamen who would not even be able to feed themselves outside of the next 24 hours.
Right. We can have a conversation about veterancy and like motivation of the militia. But yeah. And then they were like, oh, by the way, they also don't have major roads from the Venezuela to Guyana. Like it's through
rainforest. It is through literal rainforest. They would have to build their own invasion route.
Yeah. And that doesn't normally work out well. And I'm just going to throw it out there that I think several nations would be really motivated while you're cutting your way through some jungle to fly some F-15s or some Typhoons or Eurofighters and just say hello. Because and so the Venezuelans, they've been in this conundrum where I was reading the kind of the timeline recently so they were kind of a pariah after Chavez. Then when Maduro took over, people were like, ooh, this is not great, but we're not going to do anything worse. Then I believe it was the first Trump administration. He was like, sanctions, all the sanctions, like you guys, you're on one. And so that's what we've been dealing with for the last decade or so, is all of the negative consequences of that. And that's where like the Venezuelan exodus has come from, that people talk about the Venezuelans coming to the United States.
Need to specify that Venezuela has lost like a quarter of its population in the span of the last decade or so. I think 7.5 million Venezuelans now live outside of Venezuela because they fled. Like it's that bad. So I think my favorite part of seeing all the stuff that has actually happened is
you see the side by side of protests that are going on in the United States.
Yep.
And then this is paired with just Venezuelans celebrating in the streets in Venezuela and all over the world.
Right.
Because they are everywhere. They are everywhere now after the diaspora that has been taking place for the last 10 years.
Yep. And so that's where sometimes people are like, where are the Venezuelans coming? You're like, well, we kind of caused that, minor detail. But so they are now, and now that Maduro is gone, we're 2 days out from when it happened. So we're kind of speculating on where things are going to go, because there's already been some very interesting moments. And again, not trying to get like political with it, but there some things have been, the quiet parts have been said out loud a few times that you're like, oh, normally you try to play that one off for a little while, but whatever. But like circling all the way back to what they're charging him with is drug trafficking, which, okay, fine. I mean, that's created a conversation around Mexico, Colombia, all of Central America.
I can partially explain that in the first place with the history of the geopolitical. What's so interesting about that? Are you familiar with FARC?
Yes. Yeah. The communist. They started as a communist militia to take back
communist. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So for anyone who's curious, FARC is a communist drug cartel rebel force that was very prominent over the course of like the 80s and 90s, especially in Colombia. And when people are talking about the Colombian drug runners and the ones who are the ones who are in charge of the white snow, etc., like that's FARC. Like they were one of the most prominent groups that were doing this. And they were waging what was essentially a 30, I think, year-long war against the government. It was ludicrously long.
The final FARC detachment, like, surrendered fairly recently, like within the last 5 or 10 years.
Yes. And so what happened is, and this is my part that I love this because I understand why they would do this. And it sounds great on paper, but I could very easily predict that exactly this would happen. FARC goes and negotiates peace with the government. Everyone around the world is ecstatic that this massive conflict is going to end, and hopefully it will reduce the amount of drug trafficking that is going on in South America. Awesome. One problem. So in exchange for the leaders of FARC going legit, they are basically granted positions within the government, and then they are given immunity for all their previous shit crimes that they did. Basically, slate is wiped clean. I get it. They're trying to establish peace. It's done. It's over. Fantastic. This is what all the upper echelons of FARC got. All of the lower lieutenants and everyone below them basically got nothing. Because, like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to bribe every single member to lay down your arms?
Well, and it was actually one of the sillier things that they did is they gave them like reintegration communities, and then they treated them like shit and didn't pay for anything. And like, and so the foot soldiers were like, whoa. So the general that was like, hey, we're doing this for the communist government and, you know, the revolution for the proletariat, they're making millions of dollars. They're struggling to give me my lunch. I have a skill set and a very good skill set.
So all of a sudden, that vacuum that was created of upper echelon leadership within a cartel is now being filled by all those lower ranking members that in turn just restarted it again and then distributed their forces over the course of Ecuador as well as Venezuela. And as a result, Ecuador is now one of the most dangerous countries on earth. Venezuela is a hotspot for transportation of drugs into the Caribbean. And it's like, if you're going to be trying to take anything into the Caribbean, you're going to do it out of Venezuela. That's where it has been. And that's one of the key reasons why all the varying different boats were being targeted in the Caribbean, because that's where stuff was being transported through. Yes, people are then going to say, okay, well, the majority of stuff was still being transported by land across the border and then across from the Pacific from other places. Yes. But if you're going through the Caribbean, that is the route that it was going to go.
Yep.
And so it's like solving one problem, creating another, and then migrating a bunch of other problems down the road into other places.
Yes, and that's where some of the conversation around, like, have we thought about the second and third order effects of this? Because I personally remember the "Hey, mission accomplished" banner on the aircraft carrier, and then 15 years of sectarian violence after that.
That was one of my first thoughts, and then the moment I sat down and I really thought about it, I realized all the memes where people are saying, "Oh, it's Vietnam 2.0. Oh, it's Iraq 2.0. It's Afghanistan 2.0." It's not. It really is not. And here's one of the key reasons why. And this is not me saying anything that is in support of it. It's just a simple reality of a difference of countries and their history. If you actually look at the history and story of Venezuela and you compare that to Iraq, you compare that to Vietnam, you compare that to Afghanistan, any of the other quagmires that the U.S. has involved itself in previous decades or in the last half century, Venezuela is very different because it actually has a, even if not unified politically people, unified culture, unified linguistic, unified history. It's not tribal. Like, as an example, everything that you would look at, Iraq was sectarian inherently. That was only held together by virtue of a dictator. Afghanistan, inherently sectarian, only held together by virtue of horrible sectarian violence abusing the other sects. But that's a whole other thing, and it was never going to hold itself together anyway on its own.
And another point of why Venezuela in its current, with our current information, isn't the same as those is we didn't destroy the government. So one of the biggest problems in Iraq was we went in and we were like, hey, if you worked for the Iraqi government in any way, shape, or form, you are now not allowed to work in any governmental position ever.
They dismantled the institutions. Yes, the institutions were horribly corrupt, but the institutions were dismantled and then rebuilt from the ground up, which sounds great on paper, but it's a vacuum.
Right. Well, and when you take a bunch of generals, colonels, majors, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, and you're like, hey, you got really good at doing violence and like the military is your life, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And then a certain other country walks up and goes, I'll give you $10,000 a month to do what you used to do. Just make sure you're shooting Americans while you do it. They go, okay, cool. Like, I need to feed my family, so that's what I'm going to do. So because one of the, again, current event of it is with the Venezuelans is we just took Maduro, and the vice president and the head of their parliament, I believe, are brother and sister.
Yeah. Oh my God. The sheer amount of nepotism. Oh my God. It's so bad.
Again, there's a rumor. I'm going to call it a rumor, conspiracy theory, something, that the two of them were like, hey, Boobala's boys, how about you come grab him and then we'll be here. So we will see how that plays out. So anyone who's like, oh, it's for freedom. Nah, meh.
History is not black and white. It is just overlapping layers of gray mixed with a lot of crap.
And it's rarely clean. It is like, even like studying World War II, people are like, oh, we're the good side. And you're like, ooh, don't go too dark. Don't go too deep in the conversation, because you're going to learn real quickly that we weren't the good guys like all of the time. Like in general, sure. Overall, questionable.
I know that could be pretty much said for basically any side doing anything. Now, again, that's not making a moral stance on it, because there's very obviously differences, but no one is good 100% of the time. No one is evil 100% of the time. But there are still standards that you want to try to hold yourself to, and things that you should still stand by.
Correct. And so it will be interesting seeing how the certain conversations around global norms are treated going forward, because like in the Roman era, they used to come up with really funny casus bellis to be like, yes, it's a defensive war. I swear it's a defensive war. That's why we're taking the city in Spain, because defense of the Roman city state. And there's a conversation around whether Some other countries may try to use like, hey, yeah, like we don't see that election as valid. Like you guys, so we're just gonna do some things which that in our sphere.
Well, which on that note in here, going into it, all right, I think I would like to cover specifically, I guess, the story of how all of this recently happened. Like, we're not going to go into 200 years because obviously we've gone all over the place for the last like 30 minutes.
ADHD is fun.
Yes, but this is related to specifically Venezuela, and I wanted to kind of tell the story of how all of this came to be, at least within the last like 40 years, because the actual story of Venezuela and the importance of it goes back another 200 years prior to that. But we can pretty much skip past all of that. The short of it is that if you want to skip past Gran Colombia, Simon Bolivar, the breakup into varying different states within Latin America, and you get into the 1900s, which is where a lot of things start to rapidly develop. Over the course of the mid 1900s, like many parts of the world in here, it's not Colombia, Venezuela was ruled by a series of dictators, and that would happen again and again and again. Now, oil had been discovered and was being utilized at this time, and oil was, of course, the thing that would keep the state funded, and it was not a clean thing. It was absolutely horribly corrupt, and you commonly see this. It wasn't really until the 1950s and 60s, and then specifically the 1990s, that things would actually start to change. But I'm going to explain that. So the first half of the 20th century was something that was marked by just periods of authoritarianism. Like you have dictators that are constantly replacing one another. You have, what was one guy? Hold on, I had his name up here. General Juan Vicente Gomez. He ruled from 1908 to 1935. Pretty substantial in the first place. And this is the point in which Venezuela became a major oil exporter. And then following decades of leadership under varying different dictatorships, military juntas, you get Romulo Betancourt, who is elected president in 1958. Now, he is an individual that is known as the father of Venezuelan democracy, and he would oversee the 1963 election. And from that, in 1963, that is where you get the first ever civilian to civilian transfer of power in Venezuelan history. Because everything prior to that was dictatorship, coup, military overthrow, guy getting appointed, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first part. For the next 3 decades past this point, you get varying different issues that arise economically because Venezuela follows the boom and bust cycle of oil because that was its primary export.
Well, and literally what we talked about in 1973, a president was elected, Carlos Andrés Perez, and so they had massive oil income, and they were like, you know what we're going to do? Nationalize the oil industry. We're also going to spend and create great social programs, and everything's going to be great. And then the 1980s, oil prices crashed.
Yep. Exactly. And that's the part that pisses me off. Like, again, I'm telling the story of how all this went. But when people try to say, oh, well, they did something good and they didn't know that it wasn't going to be like this. Hell no, they didn't know that it was going to be like this because it happened multiple times over the course of their history that the exact same thing happened. It's just you built a bigger, shittier tower that, of course, when that collapsed, it did a lot more damage than what it had done when everything was smaller. Like that's the thing. So yeah, it follows the boom and bust cycle, and the whole reason that things are able to maintain together is that over the course of this time period in the early 1960s, you have a political pact which was essentially called Puntofismo. And this was a deal where elections were limited to 2 parties, which is not the same as like a 2-party system where they just happen to be dominant. It's like, no, basically these 2 parties would actually just make a deal to trade off power with one another and control everything. And corruption within the government is absolutely endemic. And that is where Hugo Chavez comes into being. Because Hugo Chavez was influenced by the 19th century figure that we had kind of mentioned here before, Simon Bolivar, the great unifier of, well, northern South America before everything kind of went to crap here. But he goes and he essentially goes and tries to lead a movement in it. He's a teacher, I think, at the time.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it. He's a teacher at the military academy of Venezuela, and he gains a reputation for lectures. He's like influencing all these young cadets to be radicals. He travels the country to recruit new members for his political movement. And then the 1980s and 1990s roll around, and you get a series of riots. Everything is burning in Caracas in 1989 because President Carlos Andrés Perez, I mentioned here before, he goes and implements free market reforms because, go figure, their dependency on oil kind of caused everything to crash, so they're going to fix things. Well, the problem is, in trying to fix things, it made things really rough for people because they kind of set it up for, it's like imagine you have a family who has been living their entire life on credit card debt, and now all of a sudden they can't take out more credit card debt, and all the bills come due.
Yep.
That's essentially like what it was for Venezuela.
And also Perez was accused. He was impeached under embezzlement charges in 1993. So he was dad going, yeah, I'm running up these credit cards. Well, I'm just gonna take a pile of this and walk my way out the door.
Meanwhile, he was using the black card to go to the ATM and take a cash advance out of it himself and stuff it into a bank account. Go figure. Go figure. Who to guess? Like, this is one of those things when I'm talking about something, I'm like, I don't want people to think that I'm like, oh, shame on you for you guys doing this. It was just this poor leader trying to take care of everyone. No, everyone in the story is a corrupt, stupid asshole or just incompetent in some way. Like, that's
history.
That's history. And unfortunately, when talking about some countries like the case of Venezuela, that's a lot of the characters throughout the history.
Yep.
So, yeah, they send in the police force after these riots. 275 people die, according to just the government, but Venezuelan media sources and on the ground claim that, no, it wasn't 275. It was at least 3,000.
Jesus.
It was brutal. The subsequent riots and military crackdown had a polarizing effect on the population. This shattered the image of Venezuela as being peaceful, and Hugo Chavez began to attract massive numbers under him because clearly the government was corrupt and incompetent. He was going to be the guy who was going to take power. And so he tries to stage two separate coups. Not just like a democratic election. He actively tries to stage two coups himself. The first one ended up landing him in jail before he got released in 1994, after which in 1998, he ends up getting elected president because he's just so popular. He pretty much pulls like, if anything, he pulls a Nelson Mandela.
Yep.
That is what he does. And he would embark on a program of what he would call 21st century socialism or Bolivarian socialism. And this is where things get really murky, because if you knew any kind of college student over the course of like the mid 2000s to early 2010s, and they had like a Che Guevara and Hugo Chavez shirt on and all this is where it was being preached all the time.
Yep.
This is why. Like, the thing is, I look at those people because I don't really like activists. Regardless of what their political stance is on things, I don't like activists typically because they don't think in terms of real world consequences or logical ramifications of their own ideology. It's almost like a religious belief, but with politics.
Yep.
And that's the problem. In this case, it is understandable at least why those types of college students that I'm describing here became so commonplace. Because over the course of the next decade and a half that he is in charge, he embarks on this massive social program spending that is called the Bolivarian missions, all of which were designed to boost public support for himself as well as his party. So ran by various different government bodies and ministries. The missions go and they provide adult literacy programs. They provide free healthcare to impoverished communities. They construct low-income housing for the poor. They subsidize food. They subsidize other consumer goods. They put in all these public health clinics that are run by Cuban doctors. Remember the whole human capital thing I was talking about here before. And that wins huge amounts of praise from all over the globe. Venezuela sees its literacy rate. I think I don't have the statistics in front of me here right now, but I think it went from something like a 45-50% literacy rate to over 90 in the span of like 10 years. It was huge. And they made amazing grounds. Like, the thing is, they managed to finance food, housing, social programs, all this stuff for a population of over 30 million people. And in order to make that happen, the government specifically would redirect, we're not going to say most, but a good chunk of its oil profits to addressing social inequality and propping things up. This reduced poverty drastically all across the country, which is why you would see figures like Bernie Sanders initially over the course of the late 2000s and early 2010s praising Venezuela and its system as an example of what his idea of democratic socialism should be. Except again, all of this was funded on oil. And there's another part that is not even really mentioned here. They do all of this when it comes to the varying different programs, which was great for the average person to be able to buy food and get free healthcare and all this stuff. But the new constitution that was introduced made things a little bit more questionable. It did have ample human rights protections in 1999, and it would survive a coup in 2002 that was attempted on Chavez. But after this happened, Chavez and his supporters moved to concentrate power. They seized control of the Supreme Court. They undercut the ability of any journalists, human rights defenders, or other Venezuelans to exercise any fundamental rights whatsoever. And by his second full term in office, the consolidation of power as well as rights of your average Venezuelan it was gone. It was all gone. The government had free reign to intimidate, censor, prosecute any Venezuelan who criticized the president or threatened his political agenda. If you said anything against the governor or against the president, you were gone. And a key example of this, and this is the statistic of what I was trying to bring up here in the first place. In 2004, this is where the Supreme Court issue happened. So I think I was wrong. I think Maduro also expanded it in the first place, but it was Chavez who had done this in the first place. In 2004, Chavez and his followers in the National Assembly carried out a political takeover of Venezuela's Supreme Court by adding 12 seats to its 20-seat tribunal. So if the court was already kind of divided as like 50-50 in favor of the Chavistas or others, he basically just packed in 12 more supporters so that it would be 22 for him and 10 against. Which guaranteed his power. He could do whatever it is that he wanted. In 2006, he declared that there were no more political parties. Everything was under Chavez. It was Chavismo with the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. So it became like a one-party state. And it just continuously goes on from there as all of this power is concentrated under him. As you said, he nationalizes most of the industries in 2007. Telecom, electricity industries, the central bank. He cancels the broadcast licenses of any news organizations that speak against him. Any private media, there's no more private media. It's all owned by him and the Venezuelan state. He also in this time, what was it? I remember something. This is where he starts to rule by decree, because this is where people start to be like, oh, hey, maybe like he's done all this really cool things, but we don't necessarily want him to have absolute authority over every aspect of our life. So he proposes an act that gives him the power to rule by decree for 18 months, where the National Assembly, which is already packed with his supporters, they don't even matter anymore. He can just rule and say what he wants, and now it's law. And that's it. He nationalizes even more oil industries or oil companies within the state. All of this is in the late 2000s. So this is, as you said, the high of the oil prices. And it is past this point then that he actually starts to see more opposition. Because over the course of the late 2000s going to the early 2010s, in I think it was September of 2010 or something, or it was 2011. So Venezuela's opposition coalition ends up winning in September of 2010, 65 out of the 165 seats within the National Assembly. This breaks the 2/3 majority that his Socialist Party held since 2005 that allowed them to do whatever they want. So here's what he does. And this is my favorite part of all this. Before the newly elected members are able to take office, the current pro-Chavez assembly instead puts in a law that allows him to rule by decree for 18 months. Again, which he then uses to change term limits. He redistributes oil revenue, which basically means he took out a bunch of oil money and gave it to people as bribes. And then despite losing the popular vote he redraws all the electoral districts to guarantee that his party still controls everything despite losing the popular vote.
You gotta love gerrymandering.
He does all of this in like 18 months.
I mean, he's
efficient.
efficient.
Rule by decree. Oh.
You got to respect the efficiency of the man. And one thing, because this would have been about what you said, 2010.
This was 2010 heading into 2011.
Right. Because he dies in 2013.
Yeah. He dies of cancer.
Yeah. So he knocked all this out and then was like, and deuces. I'm out.
So
then he was replaced because he was elected to a third term in October of 2012. And then he was never actually sworn in because he had medical complications and died in March of 2013. Nicolas Maduro was picked as his successor, and he appointed him as the vice president in 2013.
And then they had an election in which Maduro won by only 1.6 percentage points versus a guy by the name of, what was he called? Enrique, I think his name?
Enrique Capriles? Capriles? Capriles.
I'm going to find this. Because it's not Capriles, because it's not two L's. So, Enrique Capriles, who, he unsuccessfully sought a recount. So he did not get his recount. And Maduro, there it was. Yeah, so Maduro then afterwards consolidates his power. He uses authority given him by the National Assembly to, again, guess what? Guess what he does? Rule by decree. Again? Yep. So first Chavez does it twice, and now Maduro gets to do it. And it's from this point that the entire Venezuelan state for the next 10 years just enters free fall. Because what happened in 2014?
The full plummet of the oil prices.
Oil price crash. And oil, guess what the percentage is that Venezuela relied on oil for its exports, which when you export things, that's how you get access to foreign currency, which is used to buy foreign goods, the most valuable of which is the American dollar.
I'm going to guess it was 80%.
See, that would be ridiculously high. Even for most oil states, it is not that high. You're still somehow wrong. It's 97%. Not even Saudi Arabia is that high. Saudi Arabia is 50% of its revenue is oil. And then another, but that's just pure oil. Another 20 to 30% is from oil-based products. You know how you have plastics and other petrochemicals and other kinds of things. Yep. So it's related to oil. It's not just oil. Venezuela is 96% oil. That is an insane number.
Yep. You're making $100,000 a year off this, and because 97% of your money comes from this one place, and you're like, cool. That went from $100,000 a year to $40,000 a year. How's that rent coming? How's the mortgage going?
Exactly. So over the span of what was it? It was 2013 to 2017. The Venezuelan GDP shrank by 30%.
Jesus.
It crashed Oh my God, it crashed. And this is so bad. Remember how I said here before, and this is where people were fleeing, that the reason why Chavez had so much popular support in the beginning is because the government subsidized literally everything. It wasn't just free healthcare. It wasn't just literacy and education. It was also food and basic supplies. People were given ludicrous amounts of oil money that it was common over the course of the mid 2000s to see Venezuelans who would hop on flights. They would fly all the way to Miami, Florida. They would do all their shopping in Miami, Florida to get all these luxury goods, TVs and everything. And then they would fly back home to Venezuela with it because Venezuela didn't produce anything. They only had oil. Any of their own native industries that they had in the first place were so out of date, out of touch, so incompetent, corrupt, etc. They couldn't compete. Like they were so inefficient they wouldn't be able to compete. So there was no proper manufacturing industry that ever really developed. So they would buy everything they needed. The problem is when you run out of money to buy everything you need, this is where you started seeing the images of the grocery stores and the pharmacies that are just empty shelves. There's literally nothing. Basic goods and services are completely gone. There is nothing they can do. And that is then what sends the whole country into free fall for the next 10 years. And the response of the government was to print money so that I think, what was it? By 2017 or by the late 2010s, Venezuela had a cumulative 1.3 million % inflation.
Let's go. So if you had 1.3 million pesos at the start of this, it was the equivalent of 1 peso. That's awesome.
Yep. Oh, I got an example of this. I pulled up a statistic of this just to talk about so you understand how bad this is for how people even living their daily lives would be. As just an example, the price of a cup of coffee measured using Bloomberg's Café con Leche index, which I can't believe that's a freaking thing, but it sounds amazing. You have like indexes to measure basic goods, so I get this. This is in 2018. It was in May of 2018, it cost 2 million bolivars, which was their currency. Do you want to guess how much that same coffee had cost the previous month in April? So it was 2 million in May. What was it in April?
400,000? 800,000?
190,000. So
he's put a 0 on the end.
Yeah. 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 It's that bad. It was that bad. You can't do business at that rate because there's no tracking the currency.
Right. Because if I order a shirt right now from a manufacturer, it's going to take me 3 months from design to production to shipment to putting it on my shelf. It's 3 months. And with 1,000,000% inflation, that shirt I bought for $1, I apparently can now sell for $100 million.
Yeah. That's just it. And as all of this is going down, this is where people like, remember how you said in the beginning that it's like, oh, and then Trump came in and issued all the sanctions and it made it even worse. So while it is that did make things worse, that's not even where the original sanctions came in. Obama put them in the first place in 2014. And then again in 2015. And then Trump did it. And then Biden continued it instead of getting rid of it. And then Trump continued it again. So, I mean, they have been in place that whole time, but it actually started in 2014 under Obama. So this has been going on in a while. And it started out small scale, typically targeting individuals within the government who were committing horrible human rights abuses before moving on to widespread targeting. So this has been going on for a while. And so this is where I have to bring up, and this is not me getting political when it is that I say this, but the sheer amount of people that I see who say that the whole reason why Venezuela is the way it is, it would have been perfect if it wasn't for the United States and its damn pesky sanctions, like some Scooby-Doo villain. No, we kind of covered as to exactly why that is not the case.
Everyone has agency here. Like there's when you look at historical problems, you can be like, ooh, these guys did not help this situation, but it was already not a good situation.
No. So then in regards to what happens with Maduro and where the question of legitimacy and why we are where we are here today, Maduro stays in power. He rules by decree. He gets reelected somehow to a second 6-year term in May of 2018. This being despite boycotts and accusations of fraud in an election that was just widely condemned as being completely fraudulent. There was no real chance of any kind of victory for the opposition. He was sworn into office in January of 2019, but on 2 weeks later, the National Assembly, which has seen more of the opposition actually take power, they go and declare Maduro's election as illegitimate. And opposition leader Juan Guaido announces that he is going to assume office as interim president until free and fair elections can actually be held in accordance to the 1999 Constitution, which Guaido then gets quickly recognized by the US, Canada, and others, while Maduro has his support come from China, Cuba, Russia, and Turkey, who we all know are the greatest bastions of democracy in the world.
There's sometimes when you're like, am I the bad guy? Am I on the wrong team? Like I feel, are we the bad guys?
So the resulting standoff from that, of course, caused the U.S. to increase its sanctions on Venezuela in order to apply pressure to get Maduro to step down. It doesn't work. He continues to consolidate his power. The military is still being bribed by him the whole time with the oil industry, because remember, it's a state-owned oil industry. That's what it is. They're just extracting money out of it and giving it to officials and military men in order to keep them loyal. And as the humanitarian crisis is getting worse, thousands, millions of people are fleeing from Venezuela a year. All of this is going down. And that was the last election that Venezuela had until it was this last year. Well, technically now at this point, the last year. So 2024, in which, again, if I recall correctly, the opposition was winning, and then he shut down the election and then was just declared the winner. Yep. And now here we are. Yay. We got to now. Yay. Fantastic.
Yay. Well, all the dictator 101s, you can go back to any time in history and be like, this story is no different than any other dictator.
Yep. Well, honestly, I'm realizing now we've gone on about this for a while. I need to put my daughter to bed in the first place. So I got to go do that. And I'm getting ready to leave for Japan tomorrow. And then from Japan, I'm going to Thailand.
Nice. Yeah. So, I don't sleep. So if you want to record another one, I'm used to recording for another 3 hours. So if you want to record another one, we can do a quickie.
I would love to. And I actually do want to. The unfortunate thing is I can't, because after I get off of this, I have to pack up all my stuff to get ready to leave, because I leave at 8 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, okay. Now I understand. Oh God.
Yeah, that's the issue. But hey, next time you will see this, we'll do another recording of the setup. I will be in Japan, probably. Yeah. So we'll do that setup.
Yeah. So like we said, just now that I have the webcam, just message me on Discord or Instagram or whatever, and I'll keep an eye out for it. And most of my nights are fairly free, so I can talk about any topic at any time. So,
yep, absolutely. All right, well then, my friends, thank you all very much for joining me here today. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us in the History of Everything podcast. I know this one was a little bit more ADHD filled than usual because, Gabby got her skin bleached and grew a beard. But besides that, goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.